For this video, I'm going to take a scenic tube ride down the beautiful Rainbow River located in So today's video is kind of special to me. I really enjoy tubing down the Rainbow River, and it was one of my very first videos that I posted on this channel, and today I get to revisit it. Now, one of the reasons why I'm revisiting this particular topic is when I was first launching my channel, I didn't have any waterproof GoPros, and now I do. So this time I can actually show you what it's like to tube down the river, whereas the first video I made on this topic, I only could show you like the tube center itself, where you actually pay for the tube ride. I showed you the tram, and then I showed you like the actual distribution of tubes near the boat launch. But today I actually can show you a point of view of being on the water, being on the tube, and talk about all the different aspects of it and some of the pitfalls. One of the things that you'll notice is, later on in the video, it's a little nerve-wracking to be surrounded by power boats that are also using the river, and you're kind of like a sitting duck out on the water. So that's one of the aspects that's a little, makes you, I guess, a little uneasy when you're partaking in this particular excursion. So there's several companies that offer these excursions down the Rainbow River in tubes. This one that I'm doing today is the 2-hour tube ride and is operated by Guest Services within the borders of Rainbow Springs State Park. Now, this 2-hour tube ride is kind of nice because you don't have to travel through town on a bus and do all this other stuff. You basically park at the park, you get on a tram, it takes you to the north side of the park, and you ride the tube down the river, and you get on basically a dock, which is also on the south side of the state park, and you're basically right there at the parking lot where your car is located. So it's nice and convenient. There are longer tours that launch out of KP Hole. Those tours can run anywhere from 4 to 5 hours, and they basically get off at Swampy's restaurant, and they drop you off at KP Hole, and we're going to float by KP Hole, and I'll point that out when we get there. Another thing that I will point out is when you're at the campgrounds where the boat dock is that you launch with your tube, this is your last opportunity for the restroom break, and you'll see that little beige building earlier in the video. This is a good opportunity to use the restroom because the water is about 72 degrees, which is really cold if you're used to pool water. It's gonna be a huge mistake if you get into that cold water with a loaded bladder. Just pointing out the obvious. Definitely want to take advantage of that restroom, even if you don't feel like you need it, because once you hit that cold water, you might learn to regret that mistake. So I've been on a couple river tube rides, and this is definitely the nicest one when it comes to water clarity. I've been to some pretty murky canals and rivers that, the water is that brown color, that brackish that you pretty much familiar with, and I'm not crazy over taking a tube ride down those because brackish water is where the predators like to hide, like alligators and that type of stuff. So I'm pretty uneasy when it comes to that one. If you have any kind of hesitation because of that reason, then this is the river tube ride for you. The Rainbow River is spring fed, so the water is crystal clear. The Headspring is very close to where you launch on these tubes. There's a couple portions of this river where you can't see the bottom, and it's only because it's really deep in those sections. For the most part, with the crystal clear water, you can constantly see the bottom. So the dock in front of me right now, we're at KP Hole County Park. So this is the other place where you can launch. It's almost like there's a state park versus county park rivalry going on. It's kind of funny here. But there are two different parks that are kind of competing for the same eco-tourists. KP Hole, you can just bring your tube and jump in the water and be done with it, or you can rent a tube there. The one advantage that KP Hole has over going to the state park is KP Hole actually has lockers. So you have lockable storage. If you want to basically store your car keys or your purse or something or wallet in a locker, that's an option at KP Hole. That's not an option at the state park. You only can really store things in your car at the state park. So that is one of the downsides to going to Rainbow Springs State Park. For KP Hole, there's several operators that launch there. I know Ride and Tube at the local Sunoco is one of them, and there's a couple. I think there's two others. There's one that's located near Swampy's, as well as one that I guess operates out of a used car dealership on Pennsylvania. So there's multiple operators that launch from this KP Hole, and it's if you want the longest possible tour, that is definitely the way to do it. You know, that is a 4-hour tour. I did the 2-hour tour, and you know, I got baked on the water. The sunburn was pretty bad. There were a couple spots where I missed the sunscreen, and I got baked by just being out there 2 hours. So 4 hours is probably more than I'd ever want to do. I've never really done the 4-hour tour, and after my 2-hour experiences a couple times, I'm good with just a 2-hour run. So one of the things that I will point out about traveling down the Rainbow River is some river tube rides, you know, like the one on the Weeki Wachee State Park, you're mostly going through just the state park and some conservation areas and all that other stuff. You're not really traveling through people's backyards. When you're on the Rainbow River, it's mostly residential neighborhoods that you're traveling through. These are literally, you're riding a tube through people's backyards. I always had that in my mind, and I never really made a lot of noise. I had conversations with other people on the tubes, but I never was a jerk. See, the one thing that you have to understand about being in the United States of America is there's a lot of entitled prick that live here. While I was on this tube, there was a group of like 4 or 5 people that basically stopped in one of the shallow sections of the river and started blasting like a boombox with hip-hop music loaded with bad language. And I always just scratch my head and why there's so many entitled pricks that live in the United States. But I guess it goes with the territory. That's not something that I've ever seen happen when I've traveled overseas. People are just so much more kinder to strangers and more courteous. But here in the United States, we do have a lot of jerks. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately. I don't know why there's so many morons that live here. It just, I mean, I'm used to it because I grew up here. I've also traveled the world, and I realized that this is a uniquely American problem. They're basically trespassing into somebody else's backyard and throwing a party. You know, if you want to throw a party, do it at your own house. Seriously. So the Headspring at the top of the Rainbow River is a first magnitude spring. It's actually the 4th largest spring of its type in Florida. There's a lot of fresh water that is pumped out of that spring every day. That's why the fishing options are really good here. I'm not a fisherman, so I'm not going to claim to know a lot about fishing, but I do know that the people have told me that this is a great place to fish for catfish or bass. There's a lot of fish in the river when it comes to that. And when I was in the tube, I definitely felt some wildlife brushing around, you know, underneath me from time to time. It was mostly turtles, although I had a duck that kind of went underneath me too and kind of bumped into me. I also had, I think it was probably bass. There was definitely some sort of fish underneath me at one point. A big school of bass from what I could tell. But again, I'm not a fisherman. I can't really tell fish apart from each other. I've been told that the bass are the most common on this river, so that's why I made that assumption. So when I was talking to the tour operator that was driving the tram, he let me in on a little secret. They switched to these green tubes. The last time I came, we were just running these standard, you know, yellow tubes down the river. These are green now because apparently the other tour operators on the river were kind of swiping their yellow tubes because everybody was using the yellow tubes. In order to cut down on the swiping of inner tubes from the other operators, they actually personalize these tubes, so they actually do say like Rainbow Springs State Park on the tube, and they even have the phone number of this tour operator printed on the side of it, and they're these bright green tubes instead of the yellow ones that are a lot more common. That was kind of a funny story. I figured I'd share it. So a while back I made a video about Crystal River, Florida, and I talked about Kings Bay and all the fishermen that work in Kings Bay, and because of that there's amazing seafood restaurants out there. Well, Dunnellon, they don't have a really good shopping district, but their restaurants here are amazing. I talked about Swampies in the earlier kayak episode, but today when I went tubing, I went to this amazing restaurant called the Blue Gator. And the Blue Gator is actually located on the Wicklahoochee River, not the Rainbow River, but it's basically in town, just on State Road 41, basically on the border with Citrus County. So it's on the southernmost section of downtown Dunnellon, and the food there is amazing. It's the first time I ever ate at the Blue Gator, and I tell you, I had the fried clams and lots of extra hush puppies, and they put something in the batter. I'm not really sure what it is, but it really gives their food an amazing pop. I've eaten at Swampies quite a few times, and I love Swampies too, but right now I think the Blue Gator is probably my favorite seafood restaurant in Dunnellon because the food is amazing, and I totally would recommend checking them out. I mean, obviously it's a lot of fried fish, so if you're not into fried food and eating out of a fish and chips basket, but if you're in the mood for that type of old Florida cuisine, then it's an amazing restaurant. It's now my favorite seafood restaurant after yesterday because the food was just amazing. When you ride the tubes from Rainbow Springs State Park, you launch on the left side of the river and you exit on the left side of the river. So you're looking for this boat ramp to walk up and exit the river. You'll see the guy in the orange shirt to help you out of the river. Now keep in mind the currents are really strong in this section of the river, so it's easy to overshoot it. There is a rope that is basically floating in the water that if you basically pass the dock, you can basically kind of pull yourself out of the water, but it's easier if you just kind of paddle towards the left side of the river. That way you don't have to go through all that drama. One last thing to mention before I go is this is the boardwalk to walk back to the car. This boardwalk is pretty darn long, so you're going to want to make sure you have a comfortable pair of swim shoes, or be prepared that these boards get a little hot in the summertime, so you might need to kind of scurry along barefoot. Otherwise, this is a great little excursion, and I definitely would recommend it. It's a lot of fun to do. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe.